Reflections. Technological Morality, Part 2. Excerpts from To Will and To Do by Jacques Ellul. In Part 2 of this series, we'll go more into the ways in which technology has replaced any transcendent notion of morality with its own artificial value systems and how it has developed into a moral norm. But we must pass on to a second value of this technological morality, that of the normal. In this technological society, the normal tends to replace the moral. Man is no longer asked to act well, but to act normally. The norm is no longer an imperative of the conscience. One gets at it through average behavior, whether this is determined statistically, or by psychological evaluation, or by whatever means. Everything occurs in confirming the predominance of the normal. Increasingly, the criminal is treated as a sick, abnormal person in need of care to help him return to average, normal behavior. Similarly, the highest virtue demanded of man today is adjustment. The worst judgment a man can suffer is to be called maladjusted. Maladjusted to what? Very exactly, to the technological society. Sociologists and psychologists are agreed in acknowledging that technology is the most frequent cause of maladjustment. The chief purpose of instruction and education today is to bring along a younger generation which is adjusted to this society. The socially maladjusted exactly corresponds to the immoral of the earlier societies, and the normal exhibits the same characteristics as the older morality. For one thing, it functions as a definition of the good, as a norm, as a requirement to be met imperatively. For another thing, it is a value which makes it possible to judge, to estimate deeds, people, and events. It is a personal, individualized aspiration. Everyone strives today to be normal, and this normal repels the older notion of virtue, of good. Moral judgment is no longer tolerated over against the decision of normalcy. As long as conduct is normal, there is no reason to reprove it in the name of morality. It is no longer legitimate to declare good or evil that which is accepted as normal. This is highly characteristic of the Kinsey Report, for example, which rejects traditional sexual morality, not in the name of objective science, but really in the name of the morality of the normal.
Every aspect of our decision-making in our lives.
Dr. Judith Reisman is renowned for her expertise on the damaging influence of pornography. She has testified repeatedly before the U.S. Congress. Her research has been used by the FBI and by governments throughout the Western world when determining their policies on obscenity. She is author of the book, Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences, in which she details the devastating impact of Alfred Kinsey in America, an influence she believes is behind the growing number of sexual predators who seem to come from all walks of life.
Teachers, doctors, lawyers, judges, people are being caught right and left, sacrificing their lives and their families' lives to their addictions to child pornography. How do you think it happened? It did not start today. It started back with Kinsey, and who then kicked off what has become today's horror show. Child sexual abuse, rape, torture. People say, well, you can't track that all to Kinsey. Well, you can track enough of it to make an awfully frightening case.
While Dr. Reisman's view may seem extreme, her evidence is disturbing, the results of which are so often reported in our nightly news.
Now, this normal is not exactly the same thing as moral custom. There is in the concept of the normal a concern for precise knowledge, for the rationale of behavior, for adjustment to the objective conditions of society, for confrontation with the psychological and sociological sciences, since in the final analysis, it is the clinical technician who decides what is normal. We see, then, how this value depends upon technology and is finally subordinated to technological value. It is partly because the normal is established in relation to behavior as registered in a very precise society, the technological society, And it is no mere chance that we see the substitution of the normal for the moral going hand in hand with the setting up of a technological society, and partly because the normal is discovered and developed by techniques and in no other way. Finally, we should bear in mind a third value characteristic of this morality, namely success. In the last analysis, good and evil are synonyms for success and failure. According to the bourgeois formula, stemming from a particular interpretation of the Bible, virtue is always ratified by material success. But with the passage of time, and the temptation was too great for this to be avoided, the conclusion was drawn that success is the clear sign of virtue, since it is virtue's reward. Virtue is invisible. Success is visible. Hence, success allows us to presuppose the existence of virtue. The next step is to say that success is, in itself, the good. One is an abbreviation for the other. With this orientation, one then seeks to base morality on success, whence the demonstration that crime doesn't pay. When all is said and done, the reason one should not be a criminal is that it isn't profitable. But if we proceed in this direction, we are obliged to admit that strength is one of the essential factors of success. And then, we very soon realize that the crucial polarity is not so much that of good and evil as that of strength and weakness thence. Also, the ethical importance of the champion. The champion is necessarily a representative of the good. In another perspective, that of the communists, the expression of this identity between success and the good is found in the necessity of adhering to the direction of history. The direction of history is only seen by hindsight at each stage, in the success of a given enterprise. If it did succeed, that then means that it was indeed in the direction of history. And since, in the last analysis, it is history which determines what is good, the direction of history manifests the good in the form of success. As a matter of fact, underneath both the bourgeois and the communist ethical formulae, there lies the conviction that one does not argue with results. A successful action is necessarily compelling, and it is not to be called in question. Now, this is essentially linked up with technological operation, since the latter is just what ensures effectiveness and results. To be sure, there can be various criteria of success. In the bourgeois society, it is money, honors, titles, a higher rung of the social ladder. Under totalitarian regimes, one of the essential signs will be membership in the party. The latter is the content of the good in itself. It is also the guardian of the good. To be outside the party is not to participate in the good. To be against it is evil. Now, the party is never anything but an instrument for political effectiveness, for the technique of propaganda and of government. Here we find the link between technological procedures and the determination of the good. And likewise, we again find virtue as applied to socio-political action taken precedence over every other virtue. But we must not forget that the instrument of success in our society is always a technological instrument. Quite consciously, it is demonstrated for our benefit that the ultimate goal of technology is not merely a material result, but the fulfillment of the good. Economic abundance will permit man to develop himself spiritually, morally, and culturally. The socialist regime paves the way for a new man, who, freed from alienation and from capitalistic contradictions, will be good. That will come to pass thanks to the technique. But if such is indeed the goal of technology, every technical success participates in the ultimate good, and to oppose this development is to be truly evil and demonic.
What's a moral operating system? All right, well, we all know right and wrong, right? You feel good when you do something right. You feel bad when you do something wrong. Our parents teach us that, praise with the good, scold with the bad. But how do we figure out what's right and wrong? And from day to day, we have the techniques that we use, right? Maybe we just follow our gut. Maybe we take a vote, we crowdsource. Or maybe we punt, ask the legal department, see what they say. Oh. In other words, it's kind of random, kind of ad hoc how we figure out what we should do. And maybe, if we want to be on surer footing, what we really want is a moral framework that will help guide us there, that will tell us what kinds of things are right and wrong in the first place, and how would we know, in a given situation, what to do. So let's get a moral framework. We're numbers people, living by numbers. How can we use numbers as the basis for a moral framework?
Technological morality demands of man a commitment. It calls for the practice of virtues. It cannot be said that it requires new virtues, for these virtues are old, but they are validated, placed in the foreground. Formerly treated as minor, they now become major and exclusive. To a certain extent, one may also speak of new virtues work, for example. Let us not forget that in the traditional societies, in all societies, work was looked down upon, treated as animal toil unworthy of man. Every moral, social, and spiritual elevation was translated into an abandonment of work. It was considered a necessity in a pinch, but a damnable necessity. And this is true not only of primitive peoples, shepherds, nomads, but of all civilizations, Incas as well as Chinese, Greeks as well as Hindus, Scandinavians as well as Egyptians. They all held work in contempt, and Christian society also. In spite of the 2 or 3 biblical texts counseling work, it must not be forgotten that the stream of theological opinion was that work was a mark of condemnation, a sign of our fallen nature, and consequently a necessity which had to be accepted, but in no wise a good or a virtue. This opinion is changed with the theologians of the Reformation, who for the first time presented the positive aspects of work, but the latter will not become a virtue, and a cardinal virtue, the father of all the virtues, until the bourgeois society of the 18th and 19th centuries. That is, the first time in the history of mankind that work becomes a good, and worker a title of nobility. Now let us not forget that that was the time when the power of the bourgeoisie, when its rise to power, was based on work. Having become the ruling class, the bourgeoisie promoted the source of its authority to the status of a value for the whole society. This was the more fitting since the lower classes all worked as they had never worked before, and one had to grant them a moral satisfaction in exchange for the sacrifices one was demanding of them. To work is to pray. This work, which you are constrained to perform for the glory of the bourgeoisie, is a value, both moral and spiritual. You are doing good thereby and are working your own salvation. Now, if all were expected to be mobilized for work in this way, this was, in the final analysis, because of the development of the technique. It was technique which both required and made possible this dedication of man to work. The work which has become the principal virtue in our society is technological work. And the virtues which are elaborated in this morality are all connected with work.
How about this? What if, in any situation, you could just calculate, look at the choices, measure out which one's better, and know what to do? That sound familiar? Yep, that's a utilitarian moral framework. John Stuart Mill is a great advocate of this, nice guy besides, and only been dead 200 years. So, basis of utilitarianism, I'm sure you're familiar, at least the 3 people who voted for Mill before are familiar with this, but here's the way it works. What if what makes something moral is just a matter of if it maximizes pleasure and minimizes pain? It's not something intrinsic to the act. It's not like its relation to some abstract form. It's just a matter of the consequences. You just look at the consequences and see if overall it's for the good or for the worse.
Thus, while often an ancient vintage, these virtues now are attached to a new objective. They are splendid disciplinary virtues, the virtues of self-control, of devotion, of trustworthiness in one's work, of responsibility in the performance of tasks, of loyalty, of sacrifice to one's occupation, all are fitted into the central cardinal virtue of doing good. They all are linked to the employment of techniques. all the virtues by which we see man glorified, and justly glorified, are virtues of work. The performance of superior work is the gauge of these virtues, and sacrifice and devotion especially are functions of the creative achievement of technology. All these virtues really have as their aim to facilitate the working and utilization of techniques. This entails 3 consequences. Number 1. The gradual elimination of the other moral values, family virtues, good fellowship, humor, play, etc. All that is pushed into the background and counts for less and less. A man may act ignobly towards his comrades or his wife, but if he practices the virtues essential to work, all is forgiven him. He is cited as an example. Most of the great heroes of our day, scientists, aviators, etc., are of this type. These virtues are eliminated simply because, in the eyes of modern man, they no longer count, inasmuch as they have nothing to do with the central motif of our society. Number 2. It is constantly being said that technology is nothing without man, that when all is said and done, the decision rests with man, and that he is the master of techniques. But one forgets that, in reality, man is the one who put into shape to serve the techniques, that the virtues created for him are virtues of work, that the important word is adaptation, and that man has to be adapted, that consequently morality subordinates man to the techniques. Number 3. In the technological morality, the standard of conduct is objective. A technically well-made combination must function. Whenever it fails to work, if the technical calculation was correct, then there is a human flaw, laziness, dishonesty, or ill will. The evil is of that kind, in a word, sabotage. To be sure, there may be sabotage, objectively considered, whatever might have been the intentions of the individual. What should work doesn't work. That is the fault of the man, whatever his motives might be. The evil is in the sphere of behavior, and like the good is objectively discoverable. In addition, it is also obvious that his behavior, which affects the whole of society, should be thoroughly punished. The moral sanction gradually ceases to be a matter of the inward domain of the conscience and becomes political or social. But there is another very noteworthy virtue in this morality, namely, confidence in the future, an ability to face up to tomorrow, an assurance and hope which is astonishing in troubled times. It is the virtue of all is possible, which of course expresses in large part the value of the normal. All is possible. Not only is there no predetermined moral or spiritual limit to action, but further, the only acknowledged barrier is that which is not possible today, but which will be tomorrow. Nothing is surprising anymore. Atomic fission, Sputnik, that all belongs to the normal course of events. Tomorrow, it will be done better. In fact, this virtue especially expresses a morality of the unbounded, of the limitless, to which modern man is perfectly adapted. The boundlessness of means and of technical success produces a morality of the gigantic and the limitless. The colossal, the world's biggest, are expressions of this morality. Man no longer recognizes any limits to his conquest. When man becomes involved in the process of technical development, and no time does he have occasion to stop and say, no. In the conviction that technology leads to the good, and that at the final analysis morality is closely linked to technology, man cannot at any time come to a halt in this march forward, the problem of Oppenheimer and the atomic scientists.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
From then on, the more becomes a criterion in itself. The greater, the higher, the more powerful, that suffices. The new morality justifies automatically that which is more. It is a close companion to technology in its development and justifies it as it goes along. The good, then, appears as the surpassing of limits. What one cannot do today, he will be able to do tomorrow, and that is good. From the fact that we have to do with the morality of the unlimited, we arrive at a rule of conduct for man which is perfectly adapted to the requirements of modern society and which is coextensive with his professional activity. Through that aspect, we again see three characteristics of this morality, already indicated in the course of this discussion in this video. As a whole, it is a morality of occupation, of well-doing, which becomes a total, all-embracing morality for the whole society. It is an essentially total, even totalitarian, collective morality. It is a morality which progressively atrophies the individual virtues of personal morality, and which ends in the disappearance of the individual moral sense in the degree in which it causes the moral problem to disappear. Such are the characteristics of this technological morality in the course of its development. In the last analysis, it appears as a suppression of morality through the total absorption of the individual into the group. Concerning all this, we are obliged to conclude that an answer to the question of the good does not acquire validity through its being consistent with the social environment, or with the nature of man, nor through its intellectual rigor, nor through the gravity with which it treats man, but through its foundation. It has no gravity, no depth of rigor, unless it be founded in such a way that man cannot escape it, either by pleading his freedom or his weakness, or again in thinking that he is himself the answer, which only resolves the problem by suppressing it. Morality of modern man and of its contradiction with Christian ethics is excellent. Belief in the goodness of man, the search no longer for virtue, but for a reorganization of society or for a plan of education to solve all moral problems, the validation of the reason as a guide to man, faith in salvation through history or faith in progress, elimination of the concept of fundamental evil in favor of the idea of particular evils, etc. All of that enters into what we are calling technological morality. Finally, one should evoke the morality which would arise automatically through biological or chemical manipulations. Let us bear in mind the discourse pronounced by Jean Rostand before the Académie Française in 1962, in which he said this: "It is in the direct line of our progress to learn how to control chemically the deeds of our conduct like the other phenomena of life. It is already possible through the use of a hormone or a vitamin or an oligo element to produce an increase of courage, willpower, maternal love. After the tranquilizers will come the moralizers. We are all promised soon to have available drugs to reduce envy and to calm ambition. And how long will it be before we have lozenges for devotion, tablets for gentleness, and pills for self-denial? This is nothing but an extension of the technological morality, beginning with the moment when it is only a question of securing behavior in conformity with the collective behavior, apart from any individual decision or responsibility."